In 1935, the American South was washing into the sea. 100 years of cotton had stripped the topsoil off the hills, and out on the plains, the dust storms had made soil erosion a national emergency. The United States government went looking for a fix and settled on a vine from the far side of the world, an Asian import that grew a foot a day and asked for nothing. Kudzu. It paid farmers $8 an acre to plant it across the red clay south and handed out the seedlings by the millions. Then the kudzu kept climbing, and the same government spent as much as $500 million a year trying to kill what it had paid to plant. Sprayed it, burned it, bulldozed it, lost. 200 acres of it stood in one North Georgia county, a green wall 30 feet deep in places and higher than the power lines, a thing no man could bring down. In the end, what broke 200 acres of vine was not the poison and not the money. It was a girl who had walked out of an agriculture lecture in her 3rd year, and 40 goats she bought with the last of her tuition. Under that green blanket, on ground the whole county had written off as dead, was something no one had bothered to look at in 60 years. Ruth Danner was the only one who thought to look down instead of spraying up. Every morning her father started the same way. Before first light, at the kitchen table, he said the Lord's Prayer, and only then did he walk her out to the goats. Our Father, which art in heaven. He never once told her to say it with him. She learned it the way a child learns a language, just from being in the room, and it became her own habit and stayed one, the mornings she was winning and the mornings she was not. If you begin your own mornings that way, with a word to God before the day gets its hands on you, leave an amen in the comments below. It helps this channel more than you know. And let every amen stand as a blessing over all of us, the ones watching tonight and the ones who never will. Peace on your house, and God's hand over you and the ones you love. Ruth Danner grew up in Halcott County, in the part of North Georgia where the hills are steep and the ground is red clay that runs downhill with the rain if nothing is holding it. Her family had held that ground with goats for 3 generations. She was small when her father started walking her out to the herd before dawn. So early the fog still sat in the low pasture, and the fence line was only a gray suggestion of a thing. Her father, Emery Danner, did not say much on those mornings. He let her watch. She remembered the cold coming up through her boots, the sound the herd made in the wet grass, his hand on her shoulder whenever she started to wander. And what she watched was the goats going straight for the kudzu along the fence, stripping the leaves and soft stems off the vine as though it were the sweetest thing on the property. Nobody in her family called that control. It was only what goats did, and what the family had always let them do. Which was why the Danner slopes stayed clean while the rest of the county went green. Her great-grandfather was the one who had brought the vine in. He had taken the federal government's offer, $8 an acre to plant kudzu against the erosion, back when the whole American South was trying to keep its dirt from running to the sea. The men who wrote the checks called it a miracle crop, and never once printed the part where it did not know how to stop. The only thing that could keep pace with it walked on 4 legs, and the family kept the goats on it so it never got away from them. Then the hard years came. Ruth was about 15 when the herd had to be sold to cover what could not otherwise be covered. And without the goats, the kudzu did in under a decade what it had waited 3 generations to do. It took the fence. It took the lower field. It came up over the old equipment and the far slope until the green blanket lay across ground her family had worked since before the government ever mailed a check. Her father died when she was 22. She does not talk about how. By then, she was in the 3rd year of an agriculture degree, and one afternoon a man at the front of a lecture hall explained the recommended answer to the kudzu problem. Spray. And when that failed, spray again. The same answer the whole country had been buying and losing on for 60 years. chasing a plant her family's goats had eaten to the dirt for free every summer of her girlhood. She gathered her books and left, and she did not go back. People said she had quit. She had not quit. She had only refused to keep paying good years for a wrong answer. The prayer was the other thing her father left her, besides the knowing. He had not been a preaching man. He had only been a steady one, at that same table, every morning of his life. If you have ever known one simple thing to be true, while a whole room told you that you were wrong, then you understand how a person walks out of a lecture hall and does not look back. The old Bledsoe place had been going back to the county for unpaid taxes for years before anyone put it up for sale. 200 acres on the far side of the ridge, every foot of it under kudzu. The green blanket pulled so tight over the fences in the fallen barn that a stranger driving past would not have known they were there. It was the kind of land people pointed at and called dead. On the courthouse steps that spring, a clerk read the parcel out and asked for a bid. He asked a second time. He asked a third, and the small crowd looked at the ground or at each other, because no one in Halcott County wanted 200 acres of vine the government itself had spent a fortune failing to kill. The parcel had sat on the books so long the ink had gone pale. To bid on it was to volunteer for a fight the whole country had already lost. Ruth Danner raised her hand. She paid for it with what was left of her tuition, about what a man would give for a used pickup with some years on it. The clerk wrote her name down slowly, as though he wanted to give her room to change her mind. She did not change her mind. She took the rest of the money she had and bought 40 goats. Not show goats and not milk goats. Rangy, hard-mouthed animals bred to eat what other stock would starve standing next to, the kind her family had always run. She hauled them home in a borrowed trailer and turned them out into the yard. For a day or two, the only living things on the place that did not seem to think she had lost her mind. Grady Fenn heard about it before she had the animals home. The county extension man, in his middle 50s, who had spent his whole career passing along whatever the state and federal handbooks told him to. He drove out to the fence and stood there a while before he said anything. "You know what that vine has cost this country," he said. It was not a question. Hundreds of millions of dollars, sprayed by men who went to school for it, year after year, and it beat every last one of them. And you mean to turn 40 goats loose on 200 acres of it? Ruth said the goats had held it on her family's land for 3 generations. Grady said her family's land was a fence line, and this was 200 acres. He was not cruel about it. He believed what he told her, the way a man believes a thing he read in every book he was handed, and he drove off and told the feed store what the Danner girl had done. The feed store did the rest. By the end of the week, the whole valley had the story straight. The Danner girl had quit college and put her last dollar on dead land and a string of goats. Grown men laughed about it over their coffee. More than one of them said she had taken on too much schooling, that a girl did not throw all that away unless the learning had finally turned her head. One person did not laugh. Miss Ada Renfro was near 70 and had sat in the same pew at Sardis Church longer than Ruth had been alive. When the talk came around to her, she only said that she had known the Danners a long time, that the girl's father had never once been a fool, and neither, so far as she could tell, was his daughter. It was the only defense Ruth got, and she never heard it firsthand. She kept it anyway. They asked her what 40 goats were going to do against 200 acres of vine. The next morning, she opened the gate. By the end of the first week, the goats had done a thing the whole county swore could not be done. A strip of the old Bledsoe place that had stood in April as one solid face of kudzu, vine over the fence, vine up a dead pine, was chewed down to bare red clay. The 40 goats had gone at it the way 3 generations of her family's animals had gone at the vine, low and steady, 6 to 8 pounds a head a day, and they left a hillside that looked, for the length of one breath, like winning. Ruth stood at the top and did not smile the way a person smiles at a thing that is finished. She knew what a cleared slope was worth and what it was not. Word reached the feed store before she did. The Danner girl had turned a wall of kudzu into open dirt in a week, and the talk carried the held breath of people waiting to be proven wrong. They did not wait long. 2 weeks after she cleared that first slope, she walked it again. And the ground was not bare. The shoots had come up in the night, even, in ranks, the way grass comes back after a mowing. Not a few scattered survivors. Every plant that had held a runner in April had sent up a new one, pale and certain, out of the same fixed root beneath the clay. The goats had taken the top and left what mattered. Below the soil, each plant held a woody root crown the size of a man's fist, packed with years of stored sugar. And a kudzu crown like that did not die because its leaves were eaten once. It waited. It fed the next flush up out of the dark, and it would go on until the reserve ran dry. And that did not happen in a season. It happened only after the plant was grazed to the ground again and again, through a second summer and into a third, until the crown had nothing left to send. Nobody had told her that in so many words. She read it in the ranks of New Leaf, and in her father's old saying, that anything worth killing had hidden its life somewhere a man could not reach. This was what kept coming back, and it had come back on schedule. Grady Fenn drove out to look. He towed one of the fresh shoots and said the thing he had come to say. I told you, $100 million program couldn't kill it. Wasn't going to be 40 goats. She did not argue. Arguing was for people who needed to be believed that same day. By then, the money was gone. The price of a used pickup laid out on fence and 40 head in a long winter with nothing coming in. And the vine had come back. The feed store went back to laughing, louder now, because a thing that fails after it almost works is funnier than a thing that never works at all. That morning she sat at the kitchen table before first light, the way her father had taught her. And she stayed longer than usual. The house was cold. She did not sit there asking for the vine to die. She had watched her father begin too many hard mornings the same way to believe it worked like that. What she carried away from the table was smaller and harder than a miracle. The goats had not failed. They had finished one season of a thing that took 3. The plant was not stronger than she was. It was only more patient than she had been. Her father said the land did not listen to a person in a hurry. She meant to find out whether it listened to a person too stubborn to leave. The second summer told a different story, though almost nobody in the county was reading it yet. She grazed the first slope a 3rd time that year, and a 4th. Each flush came up thinner than the one before, ragged and short, some crowns sending up nothing. She was drawing the reserve down the only way it could be drawn, taking the leaves every time the plant dared to make them, until a root that had fed itself for decades began to starve. The vine was going backward. Where the goats worked hardest, the bare clay held from one week to the next. She did not announce it. A woman who has been laughed at learns to wait until a thing is past arguing. The county was making its own war on the vine that summer, and making it loud. Where Kudzu had climbed the power poles, the trucks came through with tanks and booms, Tordon, Triclopyr, the picloram that came in a drum with the warning printed on the side. They laid it down along the shoulders in the green wall pouring toward the water, and the leaf browned and curled and looked, for a few weeks, like death. But the roadside followed Sardis Creek for the better part of a mile, and along that mile stood shallow wells that had watered gardens and stocks since before the vine was ever planted. The label on the drums said the thing a family by the creek least wanted to read, that this chemical did not stay where it was set down, that it dissolved and traveled, and was not to be used near running water or where a well might draw. No one could point to a sickness and name the herbicide as its cause, and that was the worst of it. A worry did not need a diagnosis to keep a woman at the kitchen sink after dark, holding a glass to the light. And when spring came round, the kudzu on the roadside came back. Up from the same crowns the poison had browned but never reached, reaching again for the poles. What kept coming back had cost the county its budget and its neighbors their sleep, and it had come back regardless. 2 miles up the road, on the old Bledsoe place, a young woman and 40 goats had put nothing into the creek. No drum, no drift, no printed warning. Only animals doing in plain daylight what their kind had done to this vine longer than anyone had been paid to plant it or to kill it. On her ground, a slope at a time, the goats were winning the war the trucks were losing, and hardly anyone had noticed. Grady Finn came out less that summer, and said less when he came. He had spent a working life reciting what the program said, and the program was out on the roadside losing, while the thing that was winning belonged to a girl who had never finished one of his forms. He walked her lower slope once, and got back in his truck with almost nothing to say. Ruth started every morning the same way. A few minutes of prayer at the kitchen table before the light came. The way her father had taught her. In a good season and a hard one both. And there had been far more hard ones than good. She did not yet know that somewhere past the county line, in offices with better maps than hers, people had spent as much as $500 million a year to learn the very thing she had just learned for free. The county library kept its old farm bulletins in a back room, and it was there, on a gray afternoon in the second winter, that Ruth found out where the retreat had come from. She had gone in looking for feed tables and breeding records, and found instead a stack of pamphlets gone soft at the corners. Government print. The kind of paper that told a farmer what to plant and how much he would be paid to plant it. That was the part she read twice. The vine had not crept up from the coast on its own. Someone had wanted it here. She had known the government paid to plant it. She had not known how gladly, or how much. The millions of seedlings handed out, the men who set a runaway loose across the South and wrote it into their ledgers as a soil-building crop, and moved on. They had not looked far enough down the road. That was all. They saw the near good and stopped looking. Ruth turned the pages slowly. Further in, she came to a later pamphlet, a newer kind of print, and here the same plant wore a different name. Not a crop now, a pest, a menace on the roadsides. There were figures on the page, careful and hedged, about what the country was now spending to be rid of the very thing it had once paid to plant. Mowing, spraying, cutting it back year after year. And the number the writer landed on came to as much as $500 million a year. She sat with that a while. $500 million a year to undo $8 an acre. And it was not even working. All that money, all those chemicals, and the retreat kept coming back the way it always had. What was beating it, out on her own 200 acres, cost her next to nothing. 40 goats, and the willingness to send them up the same slope a fourth time, and a fifth. The loudest thing the whole country could throw at the vine had lost, quietly, to the cheapest thing a girl could put against it. She noticed something else that winter, walking her lines. Along the north edge, where the old timber threw its shade all day, the retreat had never once grown thick. It draped the sunny road banks 50 feet deep, but under the trees it thinned to a few pale runners. The vine wanted sun. In the shade, it lost heart. Where something stood over it, it failed. The goats worked a mouthful at a time, and the seasons would not be hurried, and for a long stretch the whole thing looked like nothing at all. Right up until the year it did not. If that is a kind of patience worth watching to the end, the slow kind, the quiet kind, the kind that wins without ever raising its voice, Subscribe and stay with her, because the county was very close to changing its mind about the girl who bought the dead ground. By her second summer, the 40 goats had grown into a real herd, and the herd had opened slopes she had not walked since she was a child. By the third season, the wall of green began to pull back for real, and where it pulled back, she saw something that made her stand still. Where the retreat pulled back, the ground underneath was black. Not the red clay she had grown up scraping, the thin, orange dirt that shed water and grew almost nothing without a bag of something worked in first. She crouched at the edge of the cleared slope and pushed her fingers down into it, and it was dark and loose and deep, the way bottomland goes after a flood. It crumbled in her hand. It smelled of growth and went down past her knuckles and kept going. She did not understand it at first. Then, slowly, across that winter, she did. The vine was a legume, same family as beans and field clover, the plants that pull nitrogen out of the air and feed it into the ground through their roots. For 85 years, the retreat had lain over these 200 acres like a blanket, and the whole of that time, season late on season, it had been doing the one thing it was ever brought here to do: building soil, fixing nitrogen, turning the worn-out cotton clay her great-grandfather had failed to save into the richest black soil in the county. That was the joke of it. The men who paid $8 an acre had asked for a soil-building crop. They had gotten one. It had built the soil exactly as promised, without a sound, for most of a century, and they had spent the second half of that century calling it a monster and pouring poison on the ground it was quietly making rich. The good they paid for had come, wearing the name of a curse, where nobody thought to look. That spring she put her first crop into the open ground, half expecting it to fail. And it came up thick, dark, and heavy, faster than anything she had ever coaxed out of the tired red hills. And for the first time she let herself say out loud that the dead place had never once been dead. The goats had done more than clear it. Where the goats had grazed, they had left the ground manured behind them, and the rich black soil took the seed like it had been waiting on it. Up close it was black to the touch. Bare, rich clay gone dark. The best land for miles, on ground nobody at the courthouse would look at twice. People started coming up the lane to see it. They came in ones and twos. Some of the men who had laughed at the feed store, and stood at her fence looking at corn where the wall of green used to stand. One afternoon, Grady Fenn pulled off the road and sat in his truck a while before he got out. He had no speech ready this time. He looked at the field, and then he looked at her. And he asked her, plain, how the girl had done it. Land like this lies all across the South. Good ground gone under a wall of green, more of it than anyone has bothered to count. And under a fair share of those blankets is the best dirt in the county, waiting on one person willing to look under it instead of spraying over the top. Where are you watching this from? Is there a wall of kudzu near you? Some field or fence line the town has written off? Tell us in the comments where you are and what the green has swallowed where you live. She told him how. She had never minded telling anyone who asked. 5 years after she raised her hand at the courthouse, a man from the bank came up the lane, not to collect, but to ask what she would take for the place. The banker had come expecting to find someone in trouble, a note gone bad, a season that had not paid. He had a number already half formed in his head, and he drove the last mile slowly, the way a man drives when he means to price the land he is looking at. He did not price it the way he had planned. The green wall was gone. That was the first thing. Where the tax map still showed 200 acres of the old Bledsoe place swallowed under vine, there was open ground now. Rows in the low field, black earth turned and drilled clean, and on the far slope a herd of goats moving across grass that had no business being that color in that soil. Ruth met him at the gate with dirt on her hands. He asked her what she would take for the place. She said it was not for sale, plainly, the way she said most things, and went back to the row she had been working. And the banker stood at the fence a while longer than a man stands after being told no. The county sent an appraiser out not long after, because the Rolls could not go on carrying 200 acres at the price of dead land when the dead land had rows in it. He walked the ground the better part of a day, augured down into the low field, and turned the plug over in his palm a long time. What was under the blanket was the richest ground in the county. The paper came in the mail a few weeks later. Ruth read it at the kitchen table in the early dark, the same table where she prayed each morning, and the figure on it said the place was worth more than $1 million. She did not call anyone. She did not stand up. She set the appraisal down and took from the drawer the old bulletin she had copied at the county library, the one that laid out, in the flat language of a program long since abandoned, how the federal government had once paid farmers $8 an acre to plant this vine into these hills. She set the 2 pages side by side. $8 an acre to grow it. More than $1 million once they let it be. The same federal government, the same clay, the same 85 years, and 2 numbers that could not look at each other. She left them there and went out to the goats. The money itself came in quieter ways than a sheet of paper, from the crops the black field threw up faster than she could sell them, and from the herd. A road crew 3 counties over had given up on a right-of-way, and someone remembered the Danner girl and her goats, and now she rented the herd out by the season to clear what men with tanks and hoses could not. The country was still spending as much as $500 million a year to poison the vine. She was being paid to walk her goats into it. A man at the co-op said it for her. Someone asked after Ruth while he was buying feed, and he shifted a sack up onto his shoulder and said, without any heat in it, that those goats had done more for that stretch of country than the government ever had. He was not being clever, only saying the plainest thing he knew. It went around the feed store that afternoon and down into the church basement by Sunday, and by then it had stopped being a joke. None of it changed how she started her mornings. The neighbors came to the fence before they came to the gate. For a year or two they drove past slowly, unable to quite look away. Then the appraisal number got loose in the county the way numbers do, and the driving past stopped. A man could look at his own back 40 then, the low ground gone under vine that he mowed the edges of and left alone, and do the arithmetic. Worthless land, if a person believed the maps. The richest ground he owned, if what happened at the Danner place could happen at his. They started buying goats, not the way she had, on the last of a school fund, but carefully. A dozen here, a small herd there, along creek bottoms nobody had walked in years. They came to ask how it was done, and she told them, because there was nothing she wanted to keep. The goats ate the top. The root crown held its stores below, so a man had to graze it again and again across 2 or 3 seasons before the vine gave up. The part that had nearly broken her, and the part she told first. Even the one who had laughed loudest came up the lane. 5 years back, he had been the surest of all of them that a girl who left school to buy dead ground and 40 goats had thrown her life away. Now he stood in her yard with his hat in his hand and asked her, for the first time in his life without a joke ready, where a man started. She told him what she told everyone. Start with the worst slope you own. Let the goats teach you patience before you teach them anything. Some afternoons she climbed the hill and watched the herd work across the reclaimed ground, and thought about how her father had ever taught her any of it. He never sat her down. He never explained a goat or a vine the way the man at the front of the lecture hall had explained the answer that did not work. He only walked her out before the light, put a hand on her shoulder, and let her watch until she saw it for herself. A lesson you are handed, you set down. A lesson you work out with your own eyes, you carry for good. If she was ever given children of her own, that was how she would teach them. Not a word of instruction, only the hill and the goats and time enough to watch, the way her father had let them teach her. Grady Fenn sent people to her now. He drove out some mornings to watch the herd work, saying little, which, for a man like Grady, was its own kind of apology. On the far edge of the 200 acres, where the last of the vine had made it stand, Ruth had done nothing at all. She had let the trees come back. Kudzu wanted sun the way it wanted everything, all at once and out loud, and where she let the forest close over it, the vine thinned and yellowed and could not hold, dying in the shade of the thing that had simply outweighted it. She let it be the one place on the farm that told the whole story without a word. One morning in her 29th year, she woke before the light, prayed at the kitchen table the way her father had taught her, and went out to the field. There was frost on the black ground, and the herd moved ahead of her, heads down, working, and for a moment she was small again, and Emery was beside her, and none of the ruined years between had happened yet. The county had called it giving up. Her father would have called it going out to the goats at first light, the same as any other morning. What the whole country calls a monster. The green that eats the porches of empty houses. The thing this nation spends as much as $500 million a year to burn and poison and still cannot kill. Had spent 85 years doing, for nothing, the exact job the government once paid men $8 an acre to make it do. Building the soil. It was never dead land. It was the richest ground in the county, only covered, waiting all along for one person willing to look down below instead of spray up top. And the one who looked was a girl the whole county had told to give up her dreaming and come home. She had not thrown anything away. And I have turned that word over, thrown away, more than anything else in her story. Because the county had it exactly backward. They said she'd taken on too much schooling and it turned her head. The truth ran the other direction. She unlearned one wrong answer the whole country had paid good money for, and went back to a plain thing her father knew in his boots, that a goat will strip a vine to the dirt if you only give it the seasons to do it. There is a kind of knowing that never came with a diploma, and I would guess a fair number of you watching tonight are carrying some of it right now. A thing a father or a grandmother taught you with their hands, that the world has since decided is behind the times. It is not behind the times. Ruth Danner bet 200 acres on the old knowing, and the old knowing was right. If this story reached you, pass it on. To anyone who has been told the road they chose is a foolish one, who gets laughed at for taking the slow way over the loud one. And tell us in the comments, who have you watched find something worth having where everyone else saw nothing but weeds?